Hey, welcome to a special edition of the Nonprofits. The following interviews were recorded October 8th through 10th at the Texas Freethought Convention in Dallas, Texas. We are not taking the time to edit any of them. You get to hear them all raw and unedited, collection of guest speakers from the convention, and we hope you enjoy it. Thanks very much. All right, continuing with the Texas Freethought Convention 2010 here in Dallas. I'm joined by Paul Mitchell, the president of the Texas Freethought Convention. Is it just president of Texas Freethought Convention, or is it convention committee or chair? I never know what to call you other than sir.
You've called me a few other names too that aren't nearly as nice. I'm the president of the Texas Freethought Convention, Inc. So.
Awesome. Now this started 2 years ago in Austin.
Yep.
And we had a fairly small venue downtown.
Right.
But we got good speakers in, and we had a good time, and it was one day.
One day, that's right. And you were one of the speakers, by the way.
Yeah. As was Blair.
Uh-huh.
And well, anyway, rather than bore everybody with what we did 2 years ago,
Sure.
Last year we're in San Antonio.
Right.
And talk a little bit about how things changed and improved between Austin and San Antonio, and then we'll get to Dallas, and we'll go forward from there.
Right. We knew that we'd start small. My initial vision back in February, March of 2008, before any planning was really started, was to have about 5,000 to 10,000 people eventually in a big festival atmosphere. But, we knew we didn't have, I knew, whoever I was going to get, we weren't really going to have a whole lot of money. So we started with nothing. We started in Austin. It was a little beer hall, Sega-run beer hall, really noisy place, but it was cool. It had indoor and outdoor. We had about 120 people show up. The PA was the house PA that ended up, we had some issues there. So we grew a lot this year.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned, 120 people showed up. We had a whole bunch of speakers. It was a packed schedule. We knew that we were initially going to need to eventually get to a 2 to 3 day event. We want to do workshops. We want to do not just speakers, but we want to do comedians and musicians. So Austin was just kind of, getting our feet wet. Can we do this and not go bankrupt? And will more than 50 people show up?
Right.
So 120 people eventually ended up showing up, which we were really, really thankful for. And that gave us enough money to keep the website going and to start putting a little money down towards the next year towards San Antonio. Then in San Antonio, we got a little better. Instead of a beer hall, we were able to get into a Shriners convention space, a very secular Shriners, I guess, if there's any such thing. And you were there, so you know what that was like.
It was definitely secular while we were there.
Definitely secular, yes. So, it was a little larger venue, a little better, and a little better organized. So when we went from Austin down to San Antonio, we were able to separate the TFC officers versus a local planning committee, which is normally now it's going to be a local organization which helps out the TFC. So in San Antonio, we added on the local organization, the FACT, the Freethinkers Association of Central Texas.
Right.
And they helped us plan it. They actually provided all of the volunteers. Nick Lee, who's the vice president of TFC, well, not now because he now just took over AAI. He was the president of FACT, so he was able to get the FACT involved. And then from San Antonio to Dallas, I issued something to Dallas. I said, hey, blow San Antonio away, make it look like Child's Play, and brag about it the whole time. And they did. DFW, they have a planning committee, well organized, and we went from a little Shriners convention space to this hotel.
Yeah.
So with multiple rooms, really, for us to go to, and then, people can now just go to, just like a lot of other conventions. You can go to your hotel room, go down to the convention. If you need a nap, you go back up. After parties, stuff like that.
Yeah. So this year we had, about 280 or so?
280.
So we're closing in on 300.
Right.
We're at the Sheraton by the DFW airport.
Right.
We had a really good venue.
Yep.
We've got audio equipment that's much improved over previous years.
Absolutely.
They were nice enough to set up a table off to the side where we were able to do these interviews.
Right.
We got to talk to most of the speakers, unfortunately, because there's so much going on, and because some of the speakers' schedules were, I'm going to come in and talk, and then I have to catch a flight out that night because I need to be somewhere else. There were a few that we missed, which I think is okay, because when I put this together as a podcast and get it out to people, we're wanting to give them a taste of what they missed at TFC. But if I had every speaker come up and talk about what they did, then people just want to sit home, and we don't want people to sit home.
Right.
So we had a good time this year. Next year, the 2011 is going to be in Houston.
Yes.
And what changes are you looking for, and what are you if we set new goals for what we want them to accomplish?
Right. This year, and DFW has really raised the standard. Randy Word, who was kind of the moderator / de facto leader of the local committee, which helped us plan it, he's constantly in my ear. He's like, now we've really raised the bar, and there's no turning back. And that's good, because that puts pressure on us to just do better every year. So we're still going to have convention space next year. It's going to be in a nice hotel. I'm very, very close to signing a contract. I actually almost did, but I decided to pull back a little bit and let my contractual expert here, Don Llewellyn, look over it. Next year, I'm actually in contact with more speakers than what we ever have been. We're hoping to break into some of the tougher circles that we've had hard times breaking into, like Dawkins and Dennett and Hitchens and those guys. So, there's no guarantees, as you know.
Yeah.
So.
And if Houston doesn't get it done,
well,
and even if they do, I have no doubt at all. This thing has improved every year, and extreme pleasure by everybody who's been here. They've expressed great appreciation for the work you've done, for the work Nick's done, and for the Randy and the organizing committee here in Dallas.
Right.
I'm incredibly optimistic about what's going to happen in Houston. And you just announced the other day that in 2012 we'll be coming back home to the Promised Land.
That's right.
In Austin, and Claire Wolner from CFI and myself and Jen Peoples from ACA.
Right.
We're ecstatic and eager to jump on board to see if we can't. Now it's become like a competition. See, it's slick. You get all the local groups to.
Right.
Oh, we saw what they did in Dallas.
Right.
We can do that.
Right.
So yeah, we're looking forward to Houston. One of the things that I'm going to. And we'll probably talk about this later, is the Dallas group's done such a good job.
Right.
And I spoke to Randy, and he's going to be, giving me kind of like their lessons learned and how they went about it, and things and tips that we can pass along from city to city.
Right.
And that'll get on to Houston. And then I'm hoping to have, myself and Claire and Jen and others from the Austin area kind of peripherally involved in the Houston thing, so we can watch.
Yes.
And by the time we get to Austin, it can be this, I don't know what numbers we're looking at. We had 120 at the first one.
Right.
We had, 175, 180?
The actual count,
220.
It was 250 total. That included speakers and volunteers for the second year.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we were at 280 guests this time.
Right.
And it went from being a one-day thing to a three-day thing.
Right.
Which, I know there was some trepidation about, how do you make this leap forward, and will people show up? And, of course, they did show up.
Right.
And we had great speakers and great fun. We're getting ready here in just a minute to start the Texas Education Panel that was set up. So all of you who are in the Texas area, or even outside the Texas area, we had people coming from Oklahoma.
Right.
And with it in Houston, I can imagine certainly seeing people from Louisiana, et cetera.
Right.
Or if you want to fly in from outside to see how other groups are doing it right, you can go to TexasFreethoughtConvention.com and find out more about the organization and what we're planning for Houston.
Awesome. Yep. And the year that the world is supposed to end, that's the year that Matt Dillahunty and Jen Peoples and Claire Wellner are going to be. I'll let you say it because you said it better about 5 minutes ago. So about
I don't remember what I said.
Going out with a bang.
Oh yes, I told Daryl Ray the other day. I said that the world's actually going to end in 2012. We're doing it in my hometown. I want his ass right next to me.
That'll be good. I'm sure Daryl Ray will appreciate that.
Yeah. All right, so we'll try and get some last minute interviews here before we close out. But thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
All right, so we're at day 2 of the Texas Freethought Convention here in Dallas, and the first speaker of the day is just finished, and I wanted to make sure we got him over to talk to him and get some of this in for the nonprofits. It's Stuart Beckman, who until very recently was the president of Atheist Alliance International. You've just stepped down.
As of last week, that's right, yes.
And one of the things that you talked about towards the end, because people keep asking you what's next, which was the first question I was going to ask, was that you're going to be focused on social research with regard to religion. And you talked about that a little bit.
That's right. A lot of what goes on out in the rest of the world is just not known, and there's not the information for us to follow through with projects and grants and goals and objectives for the international community to focus on. A lot of it's just very invisible to us. So with my background in social research, I imagined that I could do a lot by working to fill that gap, to work with having the data so we can go after grants and work with the organizations to have some focused projects out there. For instance, AAI just this year had a volunteer team go out to Uganda to teach at a humanist primary school. Mm-hmm. And we would never have known about the opportunity there if we hadn't made connections and had people go down and connect to the religious community. This is well known. They talk among themselves, but we have to rebuild the wheel for our community because they don't talk with us, we don't talk with them. So, and there's not a lot of that research that's been done. We're just starting in all that. So with my background and my passion for social research, that's why I imagine that's going to be my next chapter in my life here.
Outstanding. Now, going back to talk a little bit about the past chapters, you've done a lot, particularly I think in the California area with, you were with Americans United for a while? Or
Yes, in fact, I'm still on the National Advisory Council of Americans United.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at what you've done with Atheist Alliance International, and we know there's a lot going on right there now, and the announcement has been made that Nick's going to be the next president. But looking at what you did during your tenure, what are you most happy about, and what are you most going to miss now that you're moving on to other things?
My focus was internationalizing AAI, taking the focus. It was primarily focused within the United States, and when I became president, I wanted to really make the international, that I part of AAI, a reality. Mm-hmm. So in my tenure as president, we had 4 conventions outside of the United States.
Right.
One is we had more than one convention a year. That was a big change right there. But it was also outside the U.S. So the AAI was able to have a conference in Melbourne, Australia, in Copenhagen, in Mexico City, in Montreal, and we have several more on the books for next year down to Buenos Aires and Dublin, right, and even Malta. So that was a big deal. A lot of work. I mean, it's very exhausting. I had probably took a bit more than I should have chewed on the first year out of the box, but those did happen. The one in Melbourne was the most exciting, with 2,500 people there. We'd never had any convention there before. That was the first one, and had such a resonance, such a visibility within the Australian community. Everybody was talking about it. Mm-hmm. It was amazing. I tempted to say it was a revelation of sorts, but that was very significant, probably the high point.
So there's a lot of focus on religion in America. You've been heading up an international group, and of course we have national groups, and then we even have local groups, and religious interference with politics in America seems to be it is a huge problem.
It is.
But the eyes of the world are also upon this as well. And when I've spoken to people in Europe, some of them are baffled at what goes on in America, yes, and some of them seem to have an understanding. So when you talk about the convention in Melbourne, and this being the first one and having a really good turnout, are there other areas where the situation is, I don't want to do the chicken little sky is falling, but where the situation is as critical, where there's as much conflict about religion, or are in the modern world, are we this like recessed pocket?
Are we
festering?
Unique?
Yeah.
Yes and no. We are certainly unique with the amount of money and religiosity that flows through this country. Mm-hmm. We are not unique, though, or not as bad off as some countries that at least we have on a piece of paper saying we have separation of church and state. Most of the world does not. Australia does not have that.
Right.
Canada does not have that. Most of Latin America has embedded in their constitutions, we support the Catholic Church. And that's the case for much of the world. The problems are just very different. What happens in the United States is significant because it is such... there is so much money, and we do export so much of our religion, both privately and through the military. So what happens here definitely affects the rest of the world, but it impacts the rest of the world in very different ways than what we see in the U.S.
So I know you can't give too much information about what you're doing social research-wise. You gave some interesting statistics today about prayer and changes while God was supposedly having the biggest effect on public office in the United States in years. Are you mostly looking at this from an organizational structure to get information out to people, or is this I don't know what you're willing to say about what you're going to be doing next. Specific, I don't know if you're working towards a book or if you're building up this, super secret organization to flood good statistical information to the public. But I want to know if you want to, touch on that real quick.
I am talking to a few institutions about whether there may be a place for me for the long term. But there is definitely a book in the works that's going to be part of that. And beyond that, I'm not sure I can give you much more information. Not because I'm hiding anything, but because I just I don't know.
All right. Well, Stuart, thank you very much for joining us today and for everything you've done with the Atheist Alliance International and for coming to the Texas Freethought Convention today. We all really appreciate it, and we're glad to have a chance to talk to you.
Very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get that. All right, so continuing on here at the Texas Freethought Convention in Dallas, I didn't get to actually interview speakers on the first day, so we're bringing them back from the first day, and we've got Claire Wallner, who's the executive director of CFI in Austin, and I was in a leadership conference, so I didn't get to hear anything you talked about, so I guess we'll spend a few minutes kind of going over your presentation and what's going on, with you and in the Austin area.
Okay. My talk centered around research that investigated how belief and non-belief influence the way a person grieves. And it was spurred by the death of my dog. And I talked with lots of people about their experiences with death, how they grieved. Some were spiritual, some were not. And so I started researching in the literature to see if I could find which ones were problematic, which sorts of beliefs were problematic in grief, and which ones worked, if any worked, and if being an atheist was good, bad, or indifferent.
Right.
And the research that's out there says that if you are religious and you have a positive religious coping, you see God as friendly, as forgiving, as a friend, as somebody who's making sure things are right for you, those sorts of things, then grief is more likely to progress normally. If you see God as, in a negative coping way, he's judging you, he has killed the person, taken the person from you as a punishment, or as punishing you, or you see hell as a possibility for the person who's died.
Right.
All those things result in complicated grief often and protracted grief. So that was all interesting and not terribly surprising, but what was surprising to me was that they had all these lots and lots of studies of how religion influenced belief, life, depression, how much you believed, what you believed. But there was exactly one study comparing the religious with atheists. And that one study said that those who held strong beliefs, it didn't matter whether they were strong religious beliefs or strong non-belief, people who felt certain, there's comfort and contentment in certainty, they both were doing just fine. And so it opens the door for a lot of questions. If you are studying all of these religions and their effect on the way you live without looking at the control group, it's like studying the efficacy of a pharmaceutical without ever looking at whether the placebo has the same effect.
Right.
And that to me is so interesting that I'm actually thinking maybe it'd be good to go back to school and be the atheist in the religious studies program who looks at these things and opens up a whole new world for atheists, because at this point we're not understood by a lot of people, and I would love to increase that understanding in the public eye, what it means to be atheist, what it means to how we look at death,
right,
and how it works. It's not a frightening thing for us, that it doesn't mean we think that we're floating in black space forever or anything scary like that, trying to explain it to people. And so that's basically the talk.
Well, I for one, would, of course, encourage you to do that, because I want to see you do cool stuff, because I like talking with you. The thing is, when you talked about certainty, and these may be questions that you can't answer until you actually go do work in the area, is by and large atheists, secular individuals, people who are kind of versed in the sciences, tend to avoid the idea of certainty. That we're constantly learning, that we know things to a sufficient degree that we would, colloquially, I'll edit that later, call it knowledge, but we don't assert the same certainty that in many areas that religious people do. But I have, granted it's been a while since I lost anybody who was, extremely significant to me. I have no qualms at all about the death thing. And I'm, some people have called it emotional detachment or whatever else, but my thing is that I understand the practical reality that, as far as I can tell, this is the one and only life that I'm going to get, that death is a reality, and it's a part of that. I tend to look at it, while I would love to live for a really long time, I've often said that death to me is the punctuation mark that gives the life meaning. How much more valuable is an understanding of your 10, 20, 40, 60, 70 years, if you know that that's all you've got and you make the most of it. How much more satisfying is the end than if you think that this is a place to wipe your feet and you're going to live forever, in an afterlife. And so while many of the non-believers would lack this degree of certainty, I'd be interested to find out if, even absent certainty, if there were specific beliefs that people held strongly about the nature of life and death that were equally sufficient to kind of have the grieving process move along correctly or
productively.
Better, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I personally believe that every day above ground is a good day.
Yeah.
So I start there. I'm really not quite sure how to respond to your question, and you want to edit that out. So can you?
No, it was one question. It was a question that I didn't actually expect you to have. Like, I've got the answer, because then you wouldn't need to go research it.
Right.
It's an interesting thing. And yesterday, I caught the tail end of the talks. And Beth and I spoke afterwards, and she was like, there was lots of crying yesterday, because, of course, you talked about losing your dog and grief.
Yeah.
And there was another talk that was about religious trauma syndrome. So there was a lot of emotion in the first day, which I'm sorry that I missed out on part of it early on, because there's a lot of negative stereotypes to overcome, and one of the big ones is this idea that atheists, that secular individuals are some kind of logical robots, like, emotionless Vulcans type things.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm an outspoken atheist, and because I think I'm fairly normal, and I want people to see that I'm normal, and that I have strong emotions, and that I do good things, and that it doesn't mean that I believe in a God of any sort. I have a dear friend who's very religious, and I've gone to Bible study class with her once, and I look forward to going again. And and they were fascinated with me. Her Bible study class, the idea that I could be who I am and be an atheist. I'm sure many of them in the room felt that they'd never met an atheist before.
Right.
And there were several people who said, "Oh, I was an atheist, but now, yeah, that sort of thing." And
by and large, they were, but they were different. They were atheists for different reasons. You and I and most of the listeners fall into a slightly different category. When I hear, for example, Kirk Cameron talk about how he was a devout atheist, which of course is an absurd phrase to begin with, or these people say, well, I used to be an atheist, but okay, well, that's great. What changed your mind? Because I'm an atheist for skeptical reasons, and the type of thing that would change my mind isn't the type of thing that seems to have changed theirs. So it's completely irrelevant to me that they used to not believe. I find it, it's all of us used to not believe at some point.
Never thought about it that way before. I like that. That's true. And I will definitely talk about that the next time I go to the Bible study. The thing that they actually find the most frightening is the death thing. I think that at some level, all of them are aware that what they're believing is contradictory at the very least. And if the first question somebody asked, and if you really get down to it, the thing that scares them to death, no pun intended, is what happens after death. That's what they asked him. The very first person very sheepishly said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I really don't understand. How do you deal with death, and what does that mean to you? And the fact that I can sit there in that room and talk to them about death without any sort of fear or concern and say that it's part of life.
Yeah.
And do you remember what it was like before you were born? And sit with that for a little bit and the room's quiet. That's exactly what it's like to be dead.
Yeah.
And hear more silence. And let them just sit with that. That's... I think if we can get that single message out there, I think we will reach more people than with any other thing we do. Because that is the card that scares most people, I think, into being religious.
There's a lot of stereotypes that we have to overcome, a lot of information that we need to get out. We've tried a number of different ways of doing this over the years to show people that atheists are just people. How many times have we heard you can't be an atheist, you're so nice, or you're not an emotionless robot, right, or you're not evil. And it comes up all the time. And of course, I'm in the position of having a rather bad reputation of being antagonistic towards religion, and I am, and arrogant and condescending and all these other things. And yet, when I'm actually in a conversation with somebody about things, if we're actually going to have a conversation that is honest and equitable and fair, they come away with it with a different perspective. I'll argue fire and brimstone, tooth and nail kind of things when we're talking about subjects, topics, and somebody's asserting a religious truth. But when we get to talking about people, I think probably the reason that I'm so passionate about it is because it's so clear to me now, having come from that background, how much actual damage religion's doing. And this area related to death and grief is one that I find particularly disturbing and offensive, because you have preyed upon, or religions have preyed upon, a particular fear and our need for some kind of comfort. And so they've offered them the opportunity for comfort, which to me, and seems some people are comfortable with, well, even if I'm wrong, I'm okay with this false comfort. And that's completely dissatisfying to me. Yeah. It's like pretending that you won the lottery and then running around being all happy all day because you've convinced yourself you won the lottery,
right,
when you haven't.
Well, this is just me looking at the research and the papers that I read. I read quite a lot of the literature, and I'm not an expert in the field. I need to put that out there. But my qualification is that I have a PhD in biology, specializing in behavior, which means that if you're reading a lot of papers about psychology, you have some clue. And also I can read. and I know a lot about statistics, so I can actually look at the information and digest it for myself. But one of the primary things that they found throughout the grieving process, and I felt this, and anyone who has ever grieved feels this, and will go, yearning. You want the thing back. It's the yearning. So what is the one thing that the idea that you're going to see the person in an afterlife take care of?
Yep.
That yearning. So it's extremely appealing. But if you look at that from our point of view, and I don't mean to sound condescending, it's myth. It's not real. Mm-hmm. Anytime in psychology you have something that you believe that's not real and people know it, that's called not denial, and it's never considered healthy. So the next question I want to answer in that whole field of religious studies and using atheists as a control group, since we've already got a flavor from that single paper that atheism works just as well as a coping mechanism and a supportive community as having church or religion. Is the use of religion, in some sense, a form of denial, and therefore does it in any way interfere with grief beyond negative coping? Right. I'm talking about even positive coping. Does it delay a person moving on? I don't mean like forgetting the dead person or the dead thing, like or the lost thing. Yeah, there's all sorts of grieving. But does it complicate grief or in any sense interfere with it the same way denial would in any other process? So that's my big question, and I hear what you're saying, and it relates to that, I think. Yeah.
The one thing that's come up over and over again for me in emails and people calling into the show is there's this common argument for the practical application of religion, that irrespective of whether it's true or not, it's beneficial. It keeps people in line. It keeps them from committing, heinous crimes, and it gives them something to hope for, and it encourages them and all this other stuff. And what I've said many times is that, well, okay, if there were good elements of religion, and I think there are, and bad elements, why would you think that the practical, useful elements that could be positive, which are clearly not in any way tied to the truth of the religion, because we know all of these results can be achieved without the religion, why would you think that that's sufficient to give the whole package a pass? That, well, yeah, we know it does bad things, but it does some good things, so we'll keep it. Why not keep the good, get rid of the bad, and then we can focus on why did this good stuff work? If, in fact, there isn't any evidence for an interventionary God, but religion is providing benefits, and it seems to me that this is something psychological about that would tell us something about who we are, and why aren't we spending more time looking to that? Isn't that where the real benefit is, finding out who we are and how we work?
Yeah. That's an area where I would probably need a degree in psychology to understand the ins and outs of that, and I don't think I can really speak to that to the degree that I wish I could. But just having seen the person here yesterday who was talking about his experience of leaving religion, the grief of losing one's religion, holy cow, it's way more complicated than I could ever have thought. That the fiber of your being is ripped out. Somebody described it as their spinal column had been pulled out of them. Oh my God. It's not simple.
Yeah.
It's a big loss. You've been through it.
Mine was a little different, though. My process I would almost describe as having a spine inserted. I mean, granted, there was shock, but it changed who I was and and I eliminated some of the fears so that I was, a little more emboldened and a little more confident in who I am, because the more you know, the less you feel like you're constantly running around bullshitting people all the time. And I didn't experience some of the grief of that, but the guy that you're talking about, Tony, we're actually going to have him on a little later to talk about, because his story and mine are similar, and it's similar to lots of other people's. But his the impact that it had on him with regard to his grief, and the real trauma that he's gone through with this was the subject of a talk yesterday, and we'll be talking about that some more later.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Claire, for joining us over here.
Most welcome.
And
Pleasure.
we'll get this posted up. For those of you who didn't get to the Texas Freethought Convention here in Dallas, you've already missed out on a ton of stuff. And of course, by the time you hear this, the whole convention will be over. But next year's convention will be taking place in Houston, and you can visit TexasFreeThoughtConvention.com for more information, and we'll get links posted up along with this for Center for Inquiry Austin, and all of the other speakers will have contact information and things up for that. So stay tuned. All right, so continuing with our coverage from the Texas Freethought Convention, we've got Marie Castle, who was one of yesterday's speakers.
Yes.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned before, I was in the leadership conference, so I actually missed your talk.
Oh.
So if you could, let's spend a couple minutes, going over what you talked about, so the people who didn't get to make it to the convention can hear what they missed, kind of.
Well, actually, I complained a lot about how the Freethought community does not take more of a moral stance on issues. Because you have this idea that religion is the arbiter of morality, and anytime there's a moral issue, the politicians, everybody calls on preachers to give a viewpoint. Right. And my point of view is that religion is not an arbiter of morality. In fact, when you want to claim the moral high ground, atheism has a greater claim to the moral high ground than religion, because they have no claim at all. When you look at what goes on throughout history, religion has been a disaster as far as persecuting people, hurting people, imposing ridiculous doctrines on people. And one of the things I quoted is a remark by the Lutheran theologian Martin Marty. I was at a symposium on religion and public life a few years ago in Minneapolis, and I was representing atheism. And he made this luncheon speech, this keynote speech. And the one statement he made that I wrote down the minute he said it is, "It is the role of unbelievers to force religions to be benign."
Yeah.
So here's this, well, he's a pretty liberal theologian, admitting that religions have been a problem, and they are. And you have this culture war now, and what does that consist of? The religious right trying to force their views on everybody else, and persecuting, women as far as their reproductive rights, and gays and lesbians, and the whole same-sex marriage thing. And then we have the issue of physician aid in dying, where people who are desperate to end their lives under their own terms because of their serious, hopelessly ill condition are not allowed to do that. And then there's all these. Some of our speakers have talked about the laws that allow parents in faith healing religions to let their children die of medical neglect. And you have all this sort of thing going on, and then religions are claiming they're the moral high arbiters of society. They have no right to claim the moral high ground. And I'm saying it's the atheist point of view, which throughout history has fought against these things. This is why we have atheism. And I go back to, thousands of years ago. Say their tribe is throwing virgins into the volcano to appease the storm god. And there'll be somebody in the back saying, wait a minute, that's not right.
Yeah.
There's an atheist. And throughout history, when we've had slavery, we've had all these different oppressions of different people. Some non-believers say, hey, that's not right. So that's what we do. And throughout history, we have made some advances. Things are not as bad as they used to be. Well, the Islamic countries, I think, have to catch up yet.
Yes.
They have not yet been civilized. The late comedian Steve Allen, in one of his books, said it is the job of atheists to civilize the Christians. Well, we have done that, except for the religious right. Pretty good. And now we have to civilize the Islamic fanatics, the Taliban. So that's our job. And so we should be focusing on supporting the victims of these religious right laws, the tyranny, the support, women as far as reproductive rights, and gays and lesbians and all that sort of thing. That's what we should be focusing on, to show that we are the ones who claim the moral high ground, and we are the ones who are going to stand up for these people. That's basically what we should be doing, and that's
I love you.
Yeah, I'm a communications director in Minneapolis for Atheists for Human Rights, and we have a moral high ground project, and I think it's the only one in the nation. We actually have a fund where we help poor women pay for abortions, and we have a scholarship fund for gays and lesbians to show our support for that group. And we support the Death with Dignity movement. And so we do all those things. So we have this actual, moral high ground fund. And we have our publication called The Moral Atheist.
Do you have contact information, website stuff?
Yeah,
for that?
website, atheistforhumanrights.org.
Outstanding.
Yes,
Fans of the show will already know that Marie is pretty much singing my song. As a matter of fact, for the past few months, I've been traveling around to universities giving a lecture called The Superiority of Secular Morality.
Right. Yeah.
Addressing this very issue and how it's not only is it patently absurd for religious individuals to assert that they hold some moral high ground, but it is demonstrably false, and that it is secular progressive society that has dragged religions kicking and screaming. And the thing that I tend to end on is that we need look no further than religions themselves and how they've changed to know that this is true. Yeah. To know that they also recognize the superiority of secular morality because they don't believe the things that their religion was founded on anymore.
Yeah, the traditional religious beliefs that don't really exist among the religious right, of course. In the Taliban, you have the traditional beliefs, but we have, one of the columnists for our magazine is Bill Searix from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And he's made the statement that actually, as far as the liberal religionists go, they had to give up religion so they could be moral.
Yes.
And this is what they do. And back home, I'm part of this, Representative Keith Ellison's interfaith dialogue. We have this discussion groups. And he's the first Muslim elected to Congress. And he's very good on state-church separation. Okay, so we go to these things, and we're talking about the common good. And here's all these liberal religionists, and there's me and Randy Teig, my fellow atheists. There we are. And they all think it's so cute to have atheists in this group. And we're talking about the common good, and we're all on the same page. We actually 100% agree. The only difference is that the liberal religionist says, we should do these things because God wants us to do it. And Randy and I say, we do these things because it needs to be done.
Yes.
So that's otherwise we get along fine. So.
Outstanding. Well, Marie, I want to thank you for stopping by to talk to us today.
All right.
For people who missed her at the Texas Freethought Convention, I think there may be DVDs available of all the talks. We'll talk to Paul, the president of TFC, about that later on. But we appreciate your input. And I'm sorry I missed your talk. I want you to go give it again so I can sit over there and cheer you on.
Yeah.
But, all right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, so we're back at the Texas Freethought Convention 2010 here in Dallas, Texas, and I'm here with Dr. Marlene Winnell, who's a psychologist specializing in a field that you never thought you'd specialize. So welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Hi, well, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk about this because I think it needs more recognition. I have a general practice, but I have kind of accidentally developed a specialty in what I'm now calling religious trauma syndrome, which is the set of issues and symptoms that people experience when they are extricating themselves from a dogmatic kind of religion, such as fundamentalist Christianity, but any kind of fundamentalist sort of religion that has a lot of thought control.
Yeah, yours was the first talk that I was actually able to listen to yesterday because I was in the conference. And it started off, you had Tony, who we'll be talking to a little later, introduce you to give his story about breaking away from religion. But you also mentioned that this began as something you had gone through and started just typing.
Yeah, I was just writing about my own experience, yes. And I did not expect it to be something that other people would relate to so much.
And eventually, I guess it was like 17 years ago, you wrote a book, and nobody else has dealt with this subject.
Well, I wrote a book called Leaving the Fold, a guide for former fundamentalists and others leaving their religion. And it's basically a self-help book in the self-help genre and published by a company that does self-help books in psychology of all kinds. And the two publishers were very interested because they were both ex-Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
And they offered me a contract immediately without really looking at anything and going over it as they usually do with book proposals because they were so excited about it. So I did it, and then since then I've just been totally surprised that there haven't been a lot more. There are a lot of really great books on religion and the psychology of religion. And a lot of memoirs, actually, about people telling their story about leaving and recovering and so forth. But there are not any self-help books per se, and that really, I don't quite understand that.
So you've got a general practice, and because of this book and your experiences, you end up communicating with people, and all of a sudden your practice starts to take on a secondary, this new specialization of dealing with people who are suffering from something that, to me, I'm not a psychologist, but it seems obvious. And when you put the name on it, and I thought one of the most important points that you made was that when we name something, that's when it gets addressed. My question is there any reason why we shouldn't all just go ahead and start calling it this and force people to address the issue?
I think that's a good idea.
So everybody who's listening to the show, when you're talking to people who are escaping from the shackles of religion, who are going through these issues, just keep referring to this as religious trauma syndrome, and we'll kind of shift the whole zeitgeist that way. One of the things that you mentioned that you've been doing are retreats for people. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what goes on at the retreats and how it's affected you and the participants.
Okay, it's a weekend retreat. What I've done so far is basically a 3-day retreat starting on Friday night till Sunday afternoon. I've done about 7 of these over the last few years, and mostly in California, but I've also done them elsewhere. And it's a small group. It's an intensive kind of group therapy slumber party for the weekend. And people from this kind of background who are going through this experience just get together and support each other. And I lead them through a lot of activities, and they share their stories with each other and do some recovery work for the weekend. I also try to make it extremely nurturing and safe. The only rule that we have is mutual respect. Anybody can talk about anything they want. They can express any feelings that they have, and it's totally non-judgmental, and it's extremely liberating. The kind of environment is refreshing to people because it is just so different from the kind of church environment that they've had before, where they've had to conform and adhere to rules and think alike and all that kind of experience that they've just had enough of.
So, and I don't know if there's an answer to this or not, but it's one of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking about this and while Tony was talking about his experience. From what you've seen, are there several different aspects of trauma and which may or may not be more significant? For example, are people more distraught over the idea of a feeling that they've lost something that they used to think was real when they give it the religion, or are they more impacted by the loss of family members and human connections that have been terminated as a result of them no longer believing what their family members believe?
Well,
or is it both?
Well, it's both, and this is one of those things where it's such a huge package deal that and it differs. There's a range of what people have experienced because there are a number of factors involved, like what kind of church was it exactly? Was it
right.
a real severe fire and brimstone kind of teaching, or was it a little more loving than that? What was the family like? Did the family mediate it at all? Because sometimes families are able to add some human element and not emphasize hellfire or the original. I mean, the two horrible doctrines that damage people the most are the eternal damnation and hellfire threat,
right,
and the idea of original sin, that you're basically bad.
Yep.
Those are the two things that stick. and that are really hard to heal from even later in life, because those get stuck so deeply when you're a small child. And so if you get taught that when you're little. But for people that are in these environments, sometimes, depending on their personality differences, some people take it to heart and they become very sincere and very, very involved personally. They get saved, Jesus as their personal Savior. They go to church and Sunday school and vacation Bible school, and it becomes very important and personal and central to their life. They give their lives to the Lord. They want to become missionaries. They're dedicated to doing God's will, and they're expecting Jesus to come back, and it's the central meaning for their lives. And so giving it up is like just pulling the rug out from under their whole reality, right. And they have to completely start over. And those are the people that get hurt the most. And that's I find the biggest tragedy. These are the folks that took it seriously, mm-hmm. and are sometimes the most sensitive souls. And so there is sometimes a lot of grief, and they have the hardest time rebuilding. Other people, I think, that have a personality that is maybe a little more robust, a little more questioning, a little more intellectual. I've heard people say, even at age 8 or 10, they were able to sit in church and say, this doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Or they were in a family that went to church more as a cultural thing or as a Sunday morning deal, and they didn't really take it too seriously. They weren't punished constantly for disobeying, and they weren't treated like bad, horrible children all the time. And so it was a different experience. And so they were able later to just realize that the Bible wasn't the Word of God, and give it up and walk away without as much pain.
Yeah.
So there are really a lot of differences. But either way, there's usually a huge social loss. So you're right. And the family disruption and the social disruption is huge. And that's a lot of what I work with too, because that part can be like divorce, people losing partners, marriages breaking up, becoming estranged from parents, becoming estranged from children.
Yeah, a lot of grief.
Yeah,
in the sense of loss. You mentioned something. There were several things that you said yesterday that I've said before on our show and things about how religion preys on the best aspects of people. Mm-hmm. In particular, you pointed out their empathy mm-hmm. with, for example, this bloody Christ figure, mm-hmm. and their guilt.
Yeah.
That is a guilt that's false, a guilt that's imposed on them, that you are bad and you are the reason this has happened. Mm-hmm. And you've done what some people have objected to. I don't. Richard Dawkins has called this kind of religious indoctrination child abuse. Mm-hmm. You agreed yesterday. Mm-hmm. I've agreed, but you took it a step further. And we'll close out with your take on how this is more than just child abuse.
Well, can I say two things about that?
Sure.
One that I did not address yesterday is the analogy to domestic abuse, mm-hmm.
domestic
violence, which is, how people always say that this isn't just religion, this is a personal relationship.
Right.
The whole thing about a relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And my answer to that is, yeah, it's a relationship. It's an abusive relationship.
It's like we're speaking the same. I had no idea you were going to say that, because you're about to talk about the other thing that I heard yesterday. And I've said this before too. I've seen religionists who seem to have what other psychologists have called, the battered housewife syndrome or the battered spouse syndrome, where no matter how much their religion keeps abusing them, but he loves me, so I'm going to stay.
Exactly. And so the cycle of abuse. I mean, a long time ago, I thought, there's a cycle going on here. Mm-hmm. And so I read up on the cycle of domestic violence, and what it is, there's an abuse, and then the abuser blames the person who's been abused and says it's their fault. They brought it on, and that's exactly what happens in this religion. It's your fault because you've sinned, you've fallen away, you have a secret sin, there's something you've done, and so you have to go back, confess, start all over, and then you get saved and you feel better for a while, and then it starts again.
Yeah, and on that note, unfortunately, we're out of time because the convention's got to keep moving on. If we get time, maybe we'll get Marlene to come back and talk. But I'll get all the information about website, contact information, because the type of stuff that I'm doing is getting information out. But you're actually in the trenches helping people who have been victimized by this. The title of the book is Leaving the Fold, a guide for former fundamentalists and others leaving their religion. And I thank you very much for coming to the convention and agreeing to speak with us.
Well, thank you.
And
thank you for having me. And thank you for your work, too.
All right, so here we are kind of closing things up at the Texas Freethought Convention 2010 here in Dallas. The panel discussion just ended talking about education in Texas, and our current guest, Richard Haynes, was on that panel. Most of you probably know him better as Brother Richard. And you actually, despite partying to the early morning hours with some of us, came down and did another presentation beginning around 9 about parenthood and parenting from a secular perspective.
Yes, it was very sadistic of the organizers to set me up to do this at 9 o'clock in the morning, but it went pretty well, I think. And as more and more non-believers or new atheists come into our midst, we're going to have to start dealing with the things like parenting and
right.
What do we do for rites of passage? Who marries us? Who's going to bury us? All these things that we've started to address, but we need to do quite a bit more.
Yeah. Now, your background, for the people who may not know, you started off in a fairly secular household, I guess.
Yes.
And then had a teenage awakening, like
I
many
found
of us.
Jesus.
Yes. Mine, I grew up entirely religious,
right.
Got saved at 5, and then got saved again in my teen years when I realized I couldn't have possibly have understood it at 5.
Right.
So, coming from the secular, and then in those teen years, well, I came from a religious background to my teens, and you came from a secular background to your teens, and yet something about those teen years prompts this kind of discovery of religion and Jesus finding us. I wondered what you thought was the primary motivator that made you change at that time.
Desperation. I mean, I was a teenage runaway. I was very, we didn't clinically call it this, but probably manically depressive almost, and was running away. And I loved Carl Sagan. I believed in evolution. I thought religion was total crap. But out of my desperation, I obeyed the 4 spiritual laws and had asked Jesus in my heart, and it made an actual. I felt it physically. I mean, we understand the psychology of this now, but it was a real life-changing experience.
Yeah, that's one of the things that people would ask. I mean, people will come up to me now and say, well, you were never a true Christian.
Right.
And I agree with them, based on what their definition is. If your definition is that I had an actual relationship with Jesus Christ, I agree with you. I never did. But my agreement is because I don't think there is such a thing.
Right.
If what you're really talking about is when you say whether or not somebody was a true Christian was, do they believe the same things that you believe and feel the same things? Then they're utterly wrong. I mean, I went to church of my own volition. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Monday night for visitation. Wednesday night was service. Thursday was youth groups. I stood there. I felt what I perceived to be the Holy Spirit. I worked in activism, ministry, the youth group stuff. There was never any question. I was a true Christian. And now looking back on it, I can say, well, if that's what it is, then I was one.
Sure.
And if you mean something else, that's fine. But I kind of think you're playing with words.
Well, it's like when the once saved, always saved crowd. That's
right.
what they always say is, well, you were never truly a Christian. I don't see how you could be more truly a Christian than what you experienced and what I experienced.
Yeah.
I mean, I sacrificed my life basically for almost no money just to help people and to lead them to the Lord. I used to do street evangelism and, I picked up a guy hitchhiking because I wanted to save him, and he lived with me for 3 years and was in my wedding and all this stuff. I mean, I don't see how you could be more saved than I was. But things change, and you can truly find the light of reason and inspiration.
Have you had anybody in the once saved, always saved category tell you that despite the fact that you're now an atheist, apostate who would, deny all of this, that you're actually still saved?
Actually, no. I've heard that argument from people, but no one has used it with me. Have you had that?
I've had one person mention that to me. What I normally will get is that God is working in me right now and using me, so that when I convert back, I will have, and I was like, dude, if I was completely unethical, I could be freaking loaded right now. It would be trivial for me to say, hey, I've been the president of the atheist community. I've been doing a TV show, taking live calls for 5 years, and I am straight up rational, skeptical, blah, 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 and now I've found Jesus. I mean, that's front page.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Unfortunately, I'm too ethical to do that.
Right.
But there are people who are convinced that that's exactly what's going to happen, especially people who are like have the particular apostolic views about what's going to happen in the end times. Somebody even told me that the rapture's getting ready to come, and that I am specifically being tuned to lead people to Christ after the rapture in the millennial period. So.
Well, that's a pretty high calling.
I know.
It's pretty awesome.
And, of course, other people just say that I'm demon-possessed, and others, you're just a dick.
Yeah,
so.
I get all of those. Quite a bit, actually.
So you talked a little bit about parenting, and, of course, I don't have any kids, but we get lots and lots of emails.
That you know of, at least, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We get lots of emails to the show from both people entering relationships about children, people who are currently in relationships where one of them is a theist and one's a non-theist, and people who are in the process of ending relationships. And I don't have a lot of resources to direct them to. And my advice is kind of, you get what you pay for. You're asking somebody without kids about this stuff. Do you have any, special resources, books, websites, whatever, that you direct people to about parenting issues?
Dale McGowan always comes to mind, the Parenting Beyond Belief. He has a foundation, Beyond Belief, which is an incredible foundation people should donate to. He writes lots of things. There's a network of stuff being put together now, actually, as we do. I know Dan Barker wrote a few books, and we definitely need more of them. But other than Dale McGowan and those, do you know anyone? Have you heard any of them?
I usually end up pointing to Dan Barker's books, which... Honestly, I don't have kids, I'm just passingly familiar, so I'm kind of way out of my element.
Right. Well, one thing I would say, and this might sound horrible, Christians always talk about being unequally yoked, that you're not supposed to marry non-believers or somebody of a different religion. If at all possible, I do recommend that for atheists.
I do too.
I have so many friends. There's a friend right now who's a wonderful person who got married about 6 months ago to a Catholic. And she was like, oh, it's okay, we understand each other, all that stuff. Yeah. And it's already fallen apart because now they're talking about kids and how do we raise kids. And it is a big deal. Yeah. Those kind of things really do matter, and you should not go into it unaware, should I say.
Yeah. I've known couples that make it work. There are actually couples in the ACA where one person is an active atheist and the other person is, Catholic, Baptist, whatever, or a nondescript pantheist, deist, and just all the atheist stuff.
Yeah, all
too much.
In name only stuff. That's easy. But when you're talking true like fundamentalist, or you were talking about the relationship with Jesus thing, I love the argument it's not a religion, it's a relationship.
Right.
Usually those are the most religious people you ever meet in your life, the ones that have the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's quite funny because, those are the arguments we hear, and I think we were talking, this is a totally sidetrack, but we were talking about last night to people talk about having eyes to see and ears to hear what the Holy Spirit's saying, and that it's all written in parables and stuff because you don't get it, man. It's a real thing. I had someone an old friend of mine tell me 2 days ago that, it's okay that you don't believe because I know Jesus exists. That's like telling me my mother doesn't exist and I love her and all this kind of stuff, and the real feelings and stuff. And my response to her was, well, what is different between that feeling of that relationship and, say, the Son of Sam or some serial killer?
Yeah.
That feeling of the anointing and the Holy Spirit, how is that different than what someone who is a serial killer would feel? It's the exact same emotional base, and you need to kind of waken up to that realization. Of course, that was because her and I were talking about something totally different. But
we've used other extreme examples before. For example, Andrea Yates killing her kids,
right?
Because she felt, she was worried. She figured if she killed them early, they would never have the chance to, reach an age of recognition, reach an age of responsibility, and she would be sending them on to heaven. And I've contended many times that if this is the most sincere act of belief and love, even though we can recognize that this is deranged, crazy, and, we wish that she hadn't killed her kids. From her perspective, how does an outsider tell?
Right.
How do I know whether, God is talking to Andrea Yates or whether her views are correct? How do we, as outsiders, distinguish between these millions of different claims? Because there's pretty much almost a different Christianity for every Christian, and not so much with some of the other religions, but the Protestantism really kind of changed that because it becomes personal. And as soon as it becomes personal, well, you can't tell me that I'm wrong about God because God talks to me. And maybe you're just not understanding Him correctly. And this is how churches end up splitting. I'm feeling led to this, and it drives me crazy because now that I'm out, I can look at it and say, I understand that you're feeling led, but you know how many times somebody in my family has said that they feel that God's leading them to do something, and it turns out being an utter disaster. And then what happens at the end of it? God was testing me.
It's kind of like the saying,
or I didn't listen right.
That God always answers prayers.
Yeah.
Sometimes He says yes, sometimes He says no, and sometimes it's not yet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's set up. There's no way He can lose.
Yeah.
If you have sickness, you pray and you get better anyway, then it was a miracle. If you don't, well, it's a hidden sin in your life. There's no way God can lose that way, and I mean, it's utterly ridiculous, and it's amazing when those blinders come off how much you can look at these things that you would argue and be like, wow, that really doesn't make sense. It's insane. The same with the Bible stories, and when you talk about these things, I mean, like Noah's Ark, we talk about Noah's Ark being such a wonderful children's story, and you have people in their baby's room have like little Noah's Arks on the wall, and I mean, we're talking about mass genocide. We're talking about some pretty evil, wicked stuff. I mean, that is not something you want to teach your kids as a nice, happy, can't we all just get along fairy tale, Yeah,
we've talked about, framing before all over the place, on blogs and everything else, and it's I read the Bible when I was a youth, all the way through as part of a youth program thing to get us to read it all the way through. I read it again as an adult. As a kind of, I'm a backslidden Christian, and so this is part of my process is I'm going to go through and read it all again and strengthen my walk with Christ type thing. And then when again came time for the serious study, when I had decided I've been avoiding a call from God to go into ministry, now I'm ready, Lord, do whatever you want, then I read it again. But I'm reading it while I'm also reading things from infidels.org and equivalent, where people are launching objections to it. And somehow, passages like what you're talking about with Noah's Ark, that before seemed either beautiful or at the worst benign, are now just atrocious. And I think it's a testimony to the masterfulness of the insidiousness of religion, that it can so twist somebody's head in the framing of this. Because the one thing that I got, I mean, there's some things that are easy to pick on, and I've tried to work to where we don't oversimplify things.
Right.
To where I don't want to just sit here and point out everything that's wrong with your religion, because then I'm treating it unfairly. Because there are good things. I mean, this is human wisdom that's been passed on, and some of it they got right and some of it they got wrong. But I kept hearing that the Sermon on the Mount is the most beautiful, perfect thing that's ever been written, and there's absolutely no one who could read that and not come to the conclusion that these are the words of a wise, ultimate, Father God being spoken and delivered to humanity. And so what I did, and for anybody who hasn't been there, you can stop by ironchariots.org. I went verse by verse through the entire Sermon on the Mount, showing what was good advice, what was horrible advice, what was downright offensive, and what was just, dumb and wrong. I mean, factually wrong. The mustard seed is not the smallest. Well, God didn't want... No. If you're God and you say it's the smallest, I realize that there are plenty of apologists who are, you're nitpicking and, or maybe this is supposed to be allegorical. But if you're God and you're giving information to people, why not tell them what the smallest seed is? You haven't found the smallest seed yet. That would have been cool.
Right.
There's a seed that you have not yet found, which is smaller even than the mustard
See, God
seed.
could have done that so easily. He could have put somewhere in there a mathematical equation that we wouldn't figure out till 2,000 years later, that would let us know, wow, he must have been really God,
Yeah. Curiously, he has very little to say about natural selection, and even less on state boards of education, which is the panel that just finished up, and an interesting mix. I remember sitting down to look through the list, and I was like, yeah, Richard's on there, and Aaron Ra, and Jamie, and who's this guy? And Ryan from the Texas Freedom Network, who they managed to list in the brochure that he's got 2 young kids, and he's a deacon in his Baptist church, and I was like, ooh.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Yeah, and nobody would have if they hadn't said anything. And it's one of the things, whatever reputation I end up getting and how deserved it may or may not be, the thing that I keep advocating is let's take everything that's good from religion and get rid of the garbage.
Sure.
Because I'm concerned about truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's keep the things that are true, and since it involves humanity, it's about us. And let's work with whoever we need to on whatever issue. I mean, because Ryan and I will disagree on the divinity of Jesus all day, and I'll disagree with Barry Lynn. But if we're working for this same goal, we need to find ways of doing that. And we need to find ways of doing it that allow us to also challenge each other on the things that we disagree on.
Right.
How do you do that?
Well, I mentioned earlier the whole Venn diagram. I mean, there's different groups and organizations who will share certain goals we have. We have that with evolution. There's plenty of more moderate Christians who believe in evolution and think it's very important. Well, then we should be willing to work with them on those issues to know that it benefits us personally. I mean, you can even take, if you could take it to the nth degree of like, hey, who wants separation of church and state? Well, this religion would be for it. This one's not. Let's work together with them. Mm-hmm. And gosh, I mean, from Christian Scientists to you name it, there's so many different ways we could work together. And I think it's not just them who are not willing to get together. A lot of times we as atheists only want to look down upon them and talk about how stupid they are. And that may or may not be true, but, they're fellow human beings, and if we can make the world a better place, then let's try,
Yeah, and also there are many in the atheist community that are guilty of things of not even wanting to remotely associate. I know that up in Dallas you've got the North Texas Church of Freethought, and in other areas there are people who are going, oh, no, we can't do anything like that. It's too much like church.
Right.
And I gave a lecture a couple weeks ago for the atheist community of Austin, and we had to do it in a Unitarian Universalist church because it was all that was available that weekend. And there were people that were like, why are we here at church? Mm-hmm. Why are you doing this at a church? And I was like, because it was available.
Right.
And they're willing to let us do it. The idea that ridicule is fine and deserved in certain areas, but if you cannot find some common ground on which to work, then we're just butting heads all the time.
Right.
And I don't mind butting heads on issues, where we're trying to sort things out or, make a point and, there's a legitimate disagreement. Boy, if you can't find the areas where you disagree and at least come together for that, we're stuck.
Barry Lynn's a perfect example that you use. A lot of people don't realize that he is a minister and he is a Christian. And there was a debate at one of the conferences I was at about whether believers could truly be secular. Mm-hmm. And everyone said, no, they couldn't. But what about Barry Lynn? You cannot get more secular than him. And he is obviously a Christian.
Yeah, so it's kind of the publicly secular, privately religious.
Exactly.
Which I think is a reasonable expectation of the people that we put into office.
Exactly.
Not so much that they have to give up their beliefs or even stop talking about it. I'm fine with a president who wants to thank God for something if that's his personal thing. But when he starts legislating that we need to thank God as a country, that's a problem.
And that's the misunderstanding we have of the freedom of religion. And it's become this respect is automatically owed to someone. And my mother is like that, actually. She'll say, well, I believe so-and-so, and, you got to respect that. You got to respect everyone's views. No, you don't. You don't have a right to respect. Now, you have a right to hold a religious view that you may have, and you can teach your kids that, and do it privately, but when it comes into the public square, it deserves just as much ridicule, just as much questioning, and it needs to stand up to the scientific method and facts.
Yeah,
stem cell research, all that stuff. You can't say, oh, that's my religious view. Okay, well, we can't argue about this anymore.
Yeah, and I think Arn and I talked about this, too, although I may be confusing who actually mentioned this, but people who want to scream, oh, it was Tracy. People who want to scream, no, you're attacking my personal private beliefs. If they're private, how did I learn about them?
Exactly.
The second you put them out there in the public, You no longer have an expectation that I don't challenge them. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to engage me in conversation. You don't have to respond. But I'm not required to stop talking about it just because you find it particularly, personal and significant.
It's like the blue laws and prayer in schools.
Yeah.
You can pray in school if you want. It's fine. You know?
All day long.
Yeah, I used to pray all the time at
How
school.
could you possibly take prayer out of school?
Right.
It's impossible.
It's
like saying you can't think about
teacher-led prayer.
It's like telling teenage boys you're not allowed to think about girls.
Right. Well, some people do.
Or
that,
think
actually.
about other boys.
Right.
As soon as you say that, you've already had them do it. You can't control what goes on in somebody's head.
Right. It's like, don't think of Tiger.
Yeah.
Do not think of Tiger.
That's right. Which Tiger did you think of? Woods?
After I said that, I was thinking of Tiger Woods, but no, a Tiger, should I say?
So anyway, we're gonna go. We got to wrap this up. What I need to do. After all this is over, is see how we can get you down to Austin, definitely for 2012.
I would love it.
But I want to get you down before then, and
just
at a
in case
minimum,
the world ends.
Yes, because that's supposedly going to happen. Somebody said. Anyway, the other thing is we want to get you. I've got this telephone setup thing where we can get you in on nonprofit sometime to chit chat.
That'd be great. I would love to.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Richard Haynes, otherwise known as Brother Richard, for coming down to join us and participate in the Texas Freethought Convention. And we look forward to next year's convention in Houston, Texas, 2011, and then we'll do the real convention in 2012 in the promised land of Austin, where we will try to ring out the end of the world. So
thanks a lot, Matt.
All right, continuing on with the coverage from the Texas Freethought Convention, I'm joined now by Abigail Smith. Thank you for joining us.
Not a problem.
And you were supposed to give a talk on passion in science. And
yeah. I think when I started making it, it ultimately would have just turned into a 30-minute rant. So I was like, no, you know what, let's make something a little more positive, more of an educational thing. Than just me complaining about the anti-science movement and why scientists are so passionate about what we do and how that inevitably gets interpreted by the media and some outside individuals who also are pro-science of, us being obnoxious or mean or whatever.
So basically you decided to not be me.
Well, I didn't
like
think
the king of rants type thing.
Yeah, it's like I decided to kind of save the ranting for my blog.
That's all right,
instead of a captive audience.
What we got out of it today was, I thought, awesome.
I'm glad. I was terrified.
I'm a science idiot in especially in the biology areas, despite what people might think, and. You made some points today and educated people on some really important things. And I wonder if you could just give like a kind of a 1-minute once-over of your talk on endogenous retroviruses.
Sure. It's funny. I work with HIV. I, speak with my colleagues all the time, and it's not a big deal. But you give me an audience of lay people who are really excited and really want to learn something. I'm absolutely terrified that I'm going to get up there and I'm not going to teach them something. Like I'm gonna do it wrong. So I'm really glad you enjoyed it. And so what I did was just kind of talk about the basics of endogenous retroviruses and what they mean for evolution and what they mean for people personally. Like how does this aspect of evolution affect you in your life?
So you mentioned that if Darwin hadn't actually come up with the theory of evolution, we would have hit upon natural selection through these retroviruses. And
absolutely. Well, the thing is, it's like where retroviruses insert into genomes is random. Whether you're talking about HIV in humans or MMTV in mice or whatever, it's totally random. So when you add that to another random event, an endogenization event, which is a mistake, so also random. I forgot where I was going with
about.
Sorry, I got excited just talking about the retroviruses.
I know. And I was excited hearing it. What you had hit upon was when the randomness of these retroviruses allow us to get to natural selection.
Yes. So we add all this randomness, but a pattern emerges. Whereas we have this random insertion in common with chimpanzees, and chimpanzees and humans have this random event in common with orangutans or bonobos, or even going as far back as some New World monkeys that it happened so long ago. Like, you can actually, look at these endogenous retroviruses as like a connect the dots picture. You just connect these random events, and you get the picture of common descent.
Yeah, I loved it. And for the people who actually weren't here, you missed out on quite a bit. And the talk started off with the Connect the Dots theme, with a picture that I would suppose if we actually connected the dots would have been a bunny rabbit.
Yes.
Which I thought was awesome. It's such a beautiful kind of teaching tool to say, you can point to all the different gaps that you think exist in evolutionary theory, whether they be real gaps in our knowledge or imagined gaps that you're trying to widen, but you can't pretend that we can't tell a story with this.
Exactly.
And you mentioned, particularly with the retrovirus tracking for humans, chimps, and genomes and orangutans, that it was chromosomes 3, 9, 10, and 17 that show.
Yes, and that actually, that wasn't a retrovirus. That was, a Borna disease virus, which in my slide I said was even more accidentalier than a retrovirus, because Borna disease viruses should not ever insert into a genome for any reason. So for them to be inserted and to have been in a germline cell and to have been propagated, it would be a fantastic coincidence that this just happens to be in the same location in humans, chimpanzees, and orangutans.
Yeah, one of the popular, and my favorite as a layperson, proofs of common descent is one that I've seen Ken Miller use a lot, which is the fusing of chromosome 2.
Absolutely. That
we can track back. If we didn't have that, though, basically what you were talking about is that as we learn more about these retroviruses and more about the human genome, we can find these remnants, these mistakes, and track them back. The one thing you talked about was that we dated the earliest common ancestor with this particular change. We're talking about in 3, 9, 10, and 17. It's like 40 million years?
40 million years.
How do we go about dating that? Because that's the question that creationists are going to come up with all the time.
Sure. So retroviruses, and that particular virus, which was an RNA virus, make a lot of mistakes. But we can calculate at what rate, it makes a certain number of mistakes. So in, 1,000 nucleotides, over how many years would you expect to see how many mutations? And so from there, they're called molecular clocks. But the second that gene is inserted into our genome, it loses its old molecular clock. It now has a human molecular clock. And so we know the rate at which the human DNA polymerase makes mistakes. And so we can look at the differences between this virus in humans and this virus in chimpanzees and mathematically work back, how long ago did these two genes split? Because we assume at that initial infection that, of course, it was one event, so it was one sequence. But as the species diverged, they each accumulated their own individual mutation pattern at certain rates.
So it's a little like radiometric decay for retroviruses.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it all needs to be calibrated to the fossil record. We don't ever just use the molecular clock. We have that problem with viruses because we don't have fossil viruses in most cases. But what happens is we find different populations of animals that have a similar virus. Then we can kind of collaborate, or what's the word I'm looking for? We can fix our previous estimates. We've done that with HIV and various other viruses. Now,
and I won't be actually playing devil's advocate with this, but one of my favorite things is when some of the anti-evolution apologists will start talking about dating, and they'll get everything wrong. The trend that I keep seeing is that people will talk about something which is a real advantage of science, a real strength of science, and try and spin it as a negative. So you'll have apologists who'll say, well, you're dating the fossils by the rocks and you're dating the rocks by the fossils, and now when you come on and you say, well, we're mapping it to the fossil record, the apologists are going to go and say, well, you're making this, presumption and you're making all the data fit. When in reality, what we've got is just one more thing, one more piece of data.
To make the other measurement more accurate.
To make it all stronger.
Yeah.
And the idea that, science is constantly changing what it's said in the past. That's the beauty of it. This idea that is in some people's heads that we we don't have a bit of information, we don't have this bit of knowledge, and then we get it, and in their case, they seem to get it from divine revelation, and now it's static and it can never be changed.
Yeah.
That's a bad thing.
Absolutely.
When the evidence contradicts it. So because we're really limited on time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up real quick. I want you to give out the blog, the web address for your blog at Science Blogs.
Let's see. Well, if you go to scienceblogs.com, you can find my site. I think it's scienceblogs.com/ERV.
Okay, and we'll get the website added along with the text on the podcast. And the nonprofits, the podcast that this will be going up on has actually been on hiatus for a number of months, but we're in the process of getting it back on the air. And I've had PZ on a couple times. I'd like to know, because I've got a digital telephone hybrid, if we can get you on at a later time, talk some more about this and other things that you're studying.
Sure.
So it'd be great to have you
or
back.
Skype or whatever.
You bet. All right. Well, thanks to Abigail for doing this. And if you didn't make it to the Texas Freethought Convention, there's just one more piece that you missed out on. You got a little bitty taste of a longer lecture that could have educated you and given you tools to talk to other creationists or anybody who doesn't understand evolution and the process of science and why we're passionate about science pretty much across the board in our community. Next year's convention will be in Houston, Texas, and you can go to TexasFreeThoughtConvention.com for more information about how to register for next year's convention, and we look forward to seeing you all. Thanks, Abigail. All right, so continuing on with the Texas Freethought Convention 2010 here in Dallas, as we go through the guest speakers, I'm honored that we're actually joined by a person who I think I can now call my friend Daryl Ray, author of The God Virus. And I wanted you to go ahead and, if you could, give, obviously we don't have time to give the whole talk, but we want to give people a little taste of what they missed out on, talking a little bit about the book and how we can view religion, at least metaphorically, as a virus.
Well, I had a lot of fun talking here with the group. It was an excellent audience to talk to. But I think the main focus that I had in my talk today, of course, couldn't go through all the book, but the main focus is how does religion propagate from one mind to the next mind?
Right.
And people don't usually think of religion in that way. And I think creating a new metaphor, and it is a metaphor. I don't want people to mistake and think I think religion is a virus, but they're just like people use a computer, the concept of computer virus. Nobody believes it's actually a virus on his hard drive or her hard drive, but it behaves like a virus on your computer, and our brains really are giant, incredibly effective computers. But occasionally, and what I talked about was how does that computer get infected with a computer virus we call religion. And that just seemed like such a powerful way to think about religion. So that was the direction I was trying to go with the group when I talked. So I'm not sure where. Not sure where it should go here.
No,
you'll edit this
because we actually did this. When you were down in Austin before, we were on the show, and of course, you've got a full book and then a 45-minute presentation, and we tried to condense it a little bit on the show in Austin, and it was there's a whole lot of information. Which mainly the biggest reason we're having people come out and talk about this is so all you people who didn't get off your butts and come up to the convention will know what you missed out on, and maybe you'll come down next year. But you'd mentioned I kind of one of the ideas that you touch on, which I always find humorous, and it's the one that I think all of it grabs people's attention. It's a good way to think about this, and we've seen it before with Dawkins talking about it as a meme, and other people dealing with things in those terms. But when you get to the point where you're talking about how it's sexually transmitted, it's a different way of phrasing something that a lot of people have talked about and felt. So
well, I do try to talk about religion as a sexually transmitted disease because and I'm dead serious in some ways about this. If you took sex out of religion, the religion itself would collapse, and it's irrespective of religion. Islam would collapse, Christianity, Catholicism, fundamentalism, every major religion on the planet would probably collapse if you took guilt around sexuality out of the equation. What would they have to organize themselves around? But the interesting thing is the sexual guilt changes per religion. Mormons have a different sexual guilt than Catholics do. Catholics have a different one than Baptists or Muslims do, or Hindus or Buddhists. And they all have some level, and it's always insidious, around sexual guilt. But it's different. There is no one sexual guilt, but all of it seems to work. And that's part of what I'm trying to say in the God virus is the God virus uses guilt to infect our brains and bring us back to a particular religion, a particular God virus. So Catholics have to get a lot of guilt, and all of the whole Catholic mythology is based around sex. I mean, Mary being a virgin, well, that's a pretty sexual idea. Jesus having never been married, that's a sexual idea. The fact that all the apostles may or may not have been married, but what happened to their wives? Somebody edited their wives out. It's pretty incredible to think there were 12 guys walking around Israel at any time, whether it was real or not is another debate, but 12 guys walking around Israel not being married at that time at the ages they were, it's almost impossible. And so somebody edited those females out. That's a sexual thing. Why not leave the females in? Probably some reason for that, and it's because the Catholic Church, early Catholic Church, was very wary about the whole sexual issues that came from the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire and all that sort of stuff.
It may be the case, though, that the apostles who were married just weren't allowed to wander around with Jesus. So
well,
I actually
think Jesus was gay and he had 12 gay men following him around. Yeah, that's probably what's going on. Yeah.
It was a fabulous time.
But the key important, and it's so important for people to remember, guilt always brings you back, religious guilt always brings you back to your particular God virus, your particular religion. So Catholic guilt brings you back to the priest for confession. Baptist guilt brings you back to the Bible, church, and Sunday school teacher and minister. Muslim religious guilt brings you back to Islam. And that's the most important part about the God virus and its infection strategy. It is a sexually transmitted disease because without sex, it couldn't get transmitted.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that you talked about yesterday, because it struck home with me. I mean, I've been doing this for a while, and we've talked before, and I've heard lots of people try to phrase these issues in different ways. And I've freed myself of guilt in, I think all of those areas, and I had convinced myself that I was now immune or largely immune from the effects of religion, or had completely escaped. And you made a point yesterday by putting up a slide and talking about triggers. Mm-hmm. And this was an image from what was clearly a Catholic church, a cathedral with the arches and a particularly stylized cross, and it had absolutely no impact on me. And you went on to say that, but if this had been, the picture of the inside of a Baptist church, which has a different style and different images that are associated with it, that would have impacted you as well. And I got to thinking that on the rare occasions when I've been, because I'll go to different churches, and so if I go to a mega church, it's like, no big deal, because that wasn't where I was at. Right. But I have a friend of mine who was a pastor at a Free Will Baptist church, which, while I wasn't part of Free Will Baptist church, the iconography and everything are similar. Mm-hmm. And I remember walking into that church, or if I go back to an actual church that I was in as a teenager, it's hard to describe. I can get over it fairly quickly, but there's this initial kind of, oh my.
Yes, right. Well, in the book, I give a little experiment to people. I don't care how long you've been out and away from the church or atheist. The programming is still somewhere embedded in your brain. In a little experiment, Jesus loves you.
Yeah.
And I just become silent, and whoever heard that continues. This I know for the... And the whole meme will fire off in your brain.
Yeah.
Or if you're a Catholic, Hail Mary. I only have to say Hail Mary full of... And they finish it.
Shit.
And they can't stop it. It's almost like it can't... The program, it's fired off.
Yeah.
And it'll fire off so fast, you almost can't control it. So that shows us that infection is deep, and it was put there before our rational immune system was capable of resisting it when you're 4, 5, 6 years old. And that's so important for people to understand, and I hope people got from my talk, because you cannot rationally argue somebody out of their religion because they weren't rationally infected with it in the first place. At 5 years old, you have no clue why you're memorizing Hail Mary or Jesus loves me. You have no clue. You just do it because you've memorized so many other things and do so many other things that seem, parents said to do it. The teacher said to do it. Sunday school teacher, minister. You just do it. And there's no critical examination of that. And it's so deeply embedded you don't even know it's there. Just same thing for what the churches you walked into. And I talk about, go back to the church you were born and raised in, and you feel those triggers. There's all sorts of things around there that will trigger, because churches are designed to put you into an altered state of consciousness where you're no longer capable of critically evaluating what's going on. And that was really big part of what I was trying to say yesterday.
Yeah, I think one of the secular organizations that did the best job of making use of that type of thing was, for example, Schoolhouse Rock, the things that would be on the Saturday mornings. I still have all of those songs going through my head.
Yes, that's true.
On a quick note, we've talked, there are a lot of people who've mentioned this. You can't reason people out of something they didn't reason themselves into.
Right.
And, but I don't want to, having been doing this for a while, I don't want to give the impression that I think it's pointless to try to reason with people and deal with that, because the trick is, people ask, how did you get out of religion? How do you, and I've tried. There's no one way,
right? Yeah.
But I think that if there's a period of separation from the constant reinforcement, if somebody has stopped attending church and stopped surrounding themselves with similar believers, but the key is, if you're going to actually apply reason, you need to make reason valuable to the person that you're talking to.
Yes,
you need to make them care about whether or not what they believe is true.
Yeah.
And then teach them how they would go about finding out whether or not it's true in any other area, and then say, why aren't you applying that to the religion as well?
Yeah.
Now, I ended up doing the bulk of that myself, but it's one of the things we end up trying to do on the show, because if I'm having a conversation with a theist, I have no illusion in my mind that I'm going to talk them out of their religion on the air.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that conversation that's going on between us is not for them. It's for the other people out there who are watching, who, wherever they are in a broad religious spectrum, haven't had instilled in them this idea that's worthwhile for them to reason and care about whether things are true. So, it's one of the reasons why we promote teaching critical thinking.
I am very much in favor of logic and reason and all that. I just think
you're not going to take a fundamentalist who's deep in it at the moment and present some argument, and they're going to go, oh, duh, what was I thinking?
But what I wanted to explain in the God Virus is why it is so difficult to argue people out. And I think that's the value of the model, is it really gives us the understanding of why it's so difficult. Doesn't mean to stop doing it. It just means you're not going to do it too easily, and let's use multiple approaches.
Yeah. It would be ridiculous of me. Yeah, I have parents and family.
Yeah.
There's not an argument. I can't point out logical fallacies and have them get it. And we've had, people who are atheists and rational thinkers who have some belief that is akin to religion, some superstitious woo belief, whatever. And it's often difficult to reason them away from that position because there's things about the way our brains work where something gets in there, and it becomes such a crucial part of how you view all of reality that reason gets kind of sidelined and chucked out the window. So,
I've been experimenting for the last couple of years with a linguistic approach to argument, if you will, with theists. I didn't talk about it in the book. Well, I tangentially did, and I didn't talk about it yesterday. But I find it's really productive. It's a really interesting way to think about arguing with people. Now, arguing, I don't even like that word. I mean, discussing or debating or talking. But if you're going to talk to a theist, what I want to start suggesting to people is let's start defining the territory more clearly, and let's define it on our side, not on their side. And here's the example, if you will. I ask people, name the 5 gods of Catholicism. And I'm going to be silent here. I want your listeners to think, who are the 5 gods of Catholicism? Because the very fact that you can't answer that question says you're buying into the Catholic doctrines. There are 5 gods. I'll name them for you now. There's the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Think about what the 4th one would be. Mary. What's the 5th one?
Well, I think you could make an argument for the Pope.
No, Satan.
Ah.
And of the 5 gods of the Catholic pantheon, which one's the most powerful? Which one can defeat the other 4, and does regularly? As the Pope noted recently, Satan.
Yep.
Satan has been working in these priests who are pedophiles, and that was the Pope's very words. So if Satan is that powerful, that's a pretty powerful God. So I use that as an illustration. I wrote an article recently on religionstolerance.org. It's called "There Are No Monotheistic Religions. Let's not buy into their bullshit." There are no monotheistic, and I don't care what they say. This fantasy of the Trinity, it's really 5 gods, and the Catholics definitely worship Mary. I mean, all this, and Satan is definitely somebody they pay attention to as much as they do the other 4 gods. So once you've defined linguistically the territory, it makes it a lot more difficult for them to argue from their perspective, because then you can say things like, well, okay, how does your Mary God relate to your Satan God? Or when you pray, which of the gods do you pray to? Do you pray to the Holy Ghost God? And where did that Holy Ghost God come from? I mean, the Holy Ghost God seemed to have appeared magically after Jesus came. He wasn't in the old Bible. So you could use that kind of linguistic... It's if you talk like you're totally ignorant, which... and then you're linguistically looking at them from the outside. Never let them define that territory. Yeah. And it really creates a whole new dialogue. I've been very pleased with the results of that so far. But
all right.
Yeah.
And the Catholic pantheon may go further, since there's so many saints.
Oh, you've got all these demigods.
Yeah. I'm going to pray to the patron saint of, prostitutes and drug addiction or whatever else.
There you go. Right. Yeah.
All right. So we managed to get a good 15 minutes in talking with Jar Ray. For those of you who didn't make it down to the conference, I don't know what's wrong with you, but we'll be having the 2011 convention in Houston, and the 2012 is going to be back home in Austin, and you'd better believe that I'll be there, and the Atheist Experience and nonprofits will be there, and hopefully we'll be able to get Daryl back down to talk some more. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for your work in the conference and the book, and we'll hope to talk to you soon. All right, so continuing our coverage at the Texas Freethought Convention 2010 here in Dallas. Now I'm joined by the Executive Director of the Secular Coalition for America, Sean Faircloth. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We met Sean a year or so ago in Austin, and I've been keeping a keen eye on what SCA has been doing, and we're looking forward to getting you back to Austin, hopefully in the near future. But it was great to see you up here, and the talk that you gave, it was like 2 talks. There was a lot that we've seen before that it's what drives people. This idea of personalizing the issue so that we can get people to care about it, so that it's not just an intellectual debate about whether gods exist. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that part of your talk real quick.
Sure. Really, it's part of a strategy that I'm working on in my year now that I've been Executive Director of Secular Coalition for America, is that I think we as a movement, a non-theist movement, tend to quite understandably be rigorous in our intellect and to try to avoid emotion almost so that we can be logical and analytical, and I think that's very admirable. However, when we're trying to reach a broader audience, I think it's important to try to frame issues in a way that has an emotional appeal. And I'm not talking about anything that's misleading. I'm talking about things that are accurate, but that, for example, as you know, when I spoke in Austin last time and today, I illustrate some of the privileging of religion in American law that really harms real human beings. And I talk about the situation where there's a separate treatment under the law in some states for child care, where child cares are exempt from the law. Today I also talked about the faith healing issue, but I'm expanding that. I'm doing a new talk on sex morality and law, and go into other examples. And so consistently you see religion used as a justification, not just for a personal opinion, but for a statute, for a law that harms the human rights of another, often in terms of your personal life or sexual choices. So that's something that I think is having a broad appeal. I'm seeing some traction from that. Then part 2 I think you're getting at is, since I came to Austin last September, I think it was, September of 2009, we've really worked on what we call our secular decade plan, and that's a goal to really resecularize America. I'm not going to sugarcoat it that I'm worried that there might be more people of a fundamentalist bent elected to Congress in the next election. I hope that's not true, but could be true. What we need to do is have a long-term plan, and I encourage people to go to secular.org, look at our website, and see the Secular Decade Plan, because this isn't about let's try something for a few months. This is about a long-term march through this decade to return our nation to its true values.
Absolutely. We had a leadership conference here on the first day that I was a part of, and so there was a lot of talk about what we were wanting to do, and there were people who were looking for direction. And while we got some really good tools and good ideas, and we were able to network, which is all good, by the time we got around to today's talks, and you managed to get up there, I could look around at the individuals who were in the leadership conference and watch their faces as they got to react to the things that I had been reacting to, because this decade plan to take over America and fix things is really what we're talking about, by demonstrating the real impact that religions have, the real impact that religious preference and laws have, and to make this something personal to people, so that it's not so much about, irrespective of whether or not your religion's true, let's talk about how we're going to deal with it in human terms with each other. To have an actual plan outlined for a 10-year period is something that is so needed and appealing that I could just see people's faces light up, and I was sitting over going, yes, and you're setting up a 50-state strategy,
right?
And you're starting with Arizona, I think, is the first one that's coming out.
Arizona is the first state to become one of our 50-state Secular Coalition affiliates. So Secular Coalition for Arizona will exist as of October 12, and our goal is all 50 states of the Union. And our Secular Decade Plan includes several components: a communications plan, a internet plan, and the 50-state plan, just to name a few of the components. Another thing is we're going to be holding a summit in May of 2011, and it's a little atypical from the conventions that we're used to, which are great. I love the conventions of our 10-member organizations, but they're more of an educational sort. This is a strategy session where we take what is now the Secular Decade Plan. I'm going to issue another document that you'll see at secular.org soon that's more detailed about the Secular Decade Plan. And then the goal of the summit is that people, maybe some of your listeners, decide they're going to come to Washington, D.C. and participate where they are directly involved in strategic planning. And maybe they say, I'm not so interested in doing something with regard to the 50-state, although I certainly want a Secular Coalition for Texas, by the way. I want to see people leading that effort. But maybe someone says, I'm an internet expert. I have internet skills. There's a component that relates to that. I'm going to burrow into that issue and try to come up with real strategic ideas. So it really offers an opportunity to sort of have the collective brain, if you will, of the secular movement get involved in this strategic effort. And that's what the summit will really be about.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm planning on doing everything I can to get out there for the summit. I'm also looking forward to having a Secular Coalition for Texas. As soon as I heard the strategy, I was like, yes, and let's get started on that. I want to make a note for the the nonprofits listeners and the fans of the Atheist Experience who have community groups in their areas, like the Atheist Community of Austin. We invite speakers in for lectures and things like that. You don't have to wait for a huge convention to get involved, and you don't have to wait for a huge convention to have somebody come out to your local group and talk. Sean was kind enough to speak to our group. He's going to be coming back, and I know that in the process of building up this 50-state strategy, the community level is where we're going to start seeing the people who want to get involved in this.
Exactly, and it's part of our mission at Secular Coalition for America. Obviously, we do straight lobbying, and we encourage your listeners to go to secular.org and check that out and see all the different issues we're working on, and we're going to continue to add even more issues. But having said that, we need that ground level folks like you're talking. That is so essential, and so check it out. In fact, I would recommend to people talking to maybe Matt Schoenle, who's the sort of a key point person in Arizona, the Secular Coalition for Arizona, and say, well, if they can do it there, we can try it here. I guess
they're starting to play the music. Just as a quick reminder, you can get Sean Faircloth, just pester him, and he will come out and talk to you. And if you haven't been motivated to get involved and get active, I don't know of anybody who's more likely to make you want to and actually follow through with that desire to get things happening.
We want to help.
we're glad to have you here. We're glad you made it to the convention. It's good.
It's an
good
honor
to have
to be
you
here.
among my friends, and we wish you a safe trip back, and we'll talk to you soon.
Texas is where to be because we got to take it back.
All right, that's it for now. We'll be back with more of the speakers as the day goes on.